Get the inside track on 20 top business trends for 2020 from Joel Block. Joel's insights bring Wall Street to your street so you can profit from the inside in 2020. Just text the word TREND to 72000. That's 72000 and download your free copy today. Grab your phone and get the inside track on business trends that affect you and your business. Just text the word TREND to 72000 for your copy now. This is Profit from the Inside with Joel Block. Insights to give your business the inside track. And now, here's your host, Joel Block.
Do you ever wonder what drives change in our world, the business world, our personal worlds, where it comes from, who the people are that are making it happen? To answer that question, Michelle Villalobos. Michelle, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm here. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Let me just give a little preface. Michelle and I are working on a couple of projects together, and I've really watched watched you work. And what's been fascinating about this is that you and we both have seminar companies, and we approach the seminar business in such different ways, but ultimately both do the same things. Mm-hmm. And it really caused me to think, that I've really been watching how you do this, and you have a very feminine approach to solving problems, and I have a very masculine approach. Not better, not worse, by the way. Yeah. In fact, I think some of your ways are way better, and I've started to adopt some of those things, and it made me kind of think, that maybe a lot of what happens in our workforce is like masculine, feminine. And I think you've got great perspective on this because you work with a lot of women, and I just thought that your perspective would be valuable.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, working with you has been really fun. For me, it's a beautiful reminder of the value. You said this earlier, of diversity. That diversity is a great thing, and diversity of thoughts and perspectives, and what you're talking about, you're speaking my language, Joel, because I do believe that there's vive la différence, right? Between the men and women, we're different. We come from a different, lineage. We have different biology and physiology. And if we look at the fact that we've only been quote unquote civilized since the dawn of agriculture, maybe 10 or 12,000 years ago. But for many more hundreds of thousands of years, we operated in a completely different way than we do right now. And what I think we're witnessing together, you and me now, is like what happens when we allow and enjoy and appreciate the difference, and the masculine and its gifts, and the feminine and its gifts. And that one of the big shifts I've made in my life just over the last few years has been really studying and practicing what does feminine leadership look like? Because I spent most of my life trying to lead and do things like a man. And I didn't even realize I was doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it didn't feel natural to me. And it didn't feel in alignment with who I really was. And I didn't put the language of masculine, feminine on it until really recently.
I think that you bring up such an important point, because I think a lot of women try to act like men because that's what they think they need to do in work. Now, I'm not talking about what happens at home. I'm talking about in a work environment, that they kind of see that they have to behave a certain way. But I think that that's not working for them, and it's creating a lot of frustration. Do you see that?
Oh, well, so what I'll say to that is, well, of course she does, because in a lot of environments, that's the only way in the door, right? Like if you think about it from the perspective, like historically, right? We did get the message that you had to do it like a man because there was no other way to enter. If you think about, like, for example, World War I, which is kind of one of those, points in time that's always pointed to as like a big transition point for women, where we entered the workforce for the first time. Women were working in factories. Because there were no men around, right? So the women had to enter these roles, and they did have to act like a man. They did have to lift heavy things. They did, but at the same time, they were not supposed to lose their feminine side. So it was a really difficult thing. And over the last few years, or decades, really, women did have to break in. There was an element of like, all right, we got to break in and we've got to prove ourselves and be as good as. And the standards for achievement in the business world were developed by and for men. And there's no, like, I think you can tell because you know me, and I hope everyone can tell. I'm not coming from like a place of anger or blame or shame or complaint in this. It's more like observation. It's like, this is what had to happen. And so there was a need to develop these more masculine qualities. And you're right. I think that there's come a time now we're starting to experience the shift of like, well, what would happen if I started to bring back more of that feminine into the picture?
That's why I wanted to bring you on the show, is because you don't have a lot of the anger that a lot of other people have. You don't have a lot of the frustration. You really kind of have a solution-oriented approach. And you've really managed to do it very well. I mean, I've given my daughter, I have two daughters, and, my older daughter is a CPA. She works in, in a pretty tough environment, one of the big firms. And I've given her a lot of counsel about how to get along with men. And I think she's been quite successful at doing that, getting along with them in a work environment. My younger daughter's a school teacher, and that's an easier environment for her. But, in a hardcore accounting firm environment where lots of money's moving around, I mean, dominated by men.
Yes.
50% of the junior people are male and female, but as you go up, it gets harder for women to stay in the workforce at that level.
Yeah. And part of it, there's so much to that. That's such a, it's such a deep, profound conversation. I think that one thing that is really important to remember, well, the way I look at it, let me back up a second. One of the kind of concepts that has helped me with this whole thing, because I actually, there is anger. There has been, especially in the past, there's been a feeling of, if I'm totally honest, and I try to be, right? Like, there was a feeling of, this isn't fair, right? Like, why don't I have the same opportunities, or why am I treated differently? And so there was that. And part of what's helped me with that is a lot of my, my more spiritual work, which, not necessarily from a religious paradigm, but more of like this idea of what would happen if I came at the world that I live in and came from the perspective that everything is exactly as it is, because that's exactly how it should be. And there's no wrong or right, no good or bad, no black or white. It's just like all of it. This is life. This is exactly as messy and as, quote unquote, my perception, maybe it feels like it's messed up. But what if I came at this and said, this is exactly what it is supposed to be? And that's really helped me with this whole, kind of like feminine leadership from a different place of like, what if I weren't angry? What if I did come from trust and came from, this is one of my mentors, her name's Nani Leah Diamond. She calls it from a place of being undefended. What if I came at leadership from a place of being sovereign and empowered and strong and undefended? And that's something that she talks about we've never really seen in history before. Being a woman was very dangerous, and in some ways it still is, but it's a lot less dangerous than it's ever been before. We have a lot more power than ever before. And so what if I came from a place of strength and like, a place of trust?
But here's the thing. Strength and power doesn't mean, doing what men do, which bully, yell, bark. I actually think that sometimes power is very subtle, and you can be very quiet and very powerful. The most boisterous person isn't always the most powerful one.
No. Right. You nailed it. Exactly. There's a different kind of power from the feminine, right? It's a different intelligence. It's a different wisdom. We talked about this earlier. If we look, at pre-civilized human society, right? The feminine was, we gave birth to the babies. We were in circle a lot, with each other. There was a lot of verbal, a lot of communication, right? And the women were the caretakers, right? We had to listen deeply. We had to, if a child didn't know how to express itself, or we didn't know what was happening, we could feel it, right? We developed intuition. We developed very nuanced language, sense of smell, what I call, or what my mentor also calls deep listening, right? This like deep receptivity. And I feel like that's one of the gifts that we have naturally that is starting to, like, that you've been observing with me. It's like I listen very deeply. And I didn't always. I used to listen to respond. I used to listen to make myself heard or to be right. Right. There was a lot of that happening in the past. And that what I've developed more of is like that quiet listening, the receptivity.
Is that a male versus female thing, or is that just a maturity thing? Because I think I've gotten better at listening too as I've gotten older, because I just understand that I can't thoroughly respond in a good way if I don't understand what the other person's saying to me. Is that a male female thing?
Well, the way to conceptualize this stuff that makes it a little less charged is using, old, like Eastern terminology, yang and yang. Yin being the yin energy, which is this quiet energy, the mysterious, like the feminine yin. It's receptive, versus yang, which is the outward projected energy, which is considered like the more masculine. If we think in terms of yin and yang, we're no longer talking about man, woman, or male, female. We're just talking about these two energetics. There's an energetic there's a version that's projected outward. And if we want to get really technical about it, right, because nature is very literal, right? The masculine body, the physiology of it, the biology, it's projection. There's a phallus and it points outward, right? And the feminine physiology and biology is receptive and it's inward, right? And so there's just biologically speaking, yin and yang. The yin is the receptive energy, the yang is the outward. And there's no human on this planet that's all one or another. There's nothing on this planet that's just one or another, right? There's integration, and there's the beauty of both. And what we've seen in the corporate environment, in the business world, in politics, in geopolitical expansion, all of it has been driven mostly by this outward yang, masculine, if you will, energy. And it is what it is. And now what we're seeing, I think, and a lot of people think, is like we're seeing the rise of this feminine energy to come in balance with that masculine, the yin energy. And what you're saying, maybe it's maturity, and maybe it's more of that yin energy as you get older as well.
Well, I think that the key word that I just heard you say is balance.
Yeah.
And we probably are somewhat out of balance in a lot of ways. And I think that part of how we have to look at bringing different people into the workforce, bringing new ideas into the workforce, is really balancing. Because I think we're probably a little top heavy. We probably have too much ideas from one place, and we need to have more ideas from more places. And yeah. I can't help but think that wouldn't be a good thing. That.
I agree. It's just like we're already starting to see it. I had a recent conversation on my podcast with Nani Leah about how we're witnessing now the advent of more feminine or yin or collaborative, however you want to call it, models in business, right? In the past, the old paradigm was about ownership, competition, winning, right? Win, lose, this or that, polarity, right? Like if I win, you must lose. And what we're seeing more and more of these win-win, and not just like I win and you win, but I win, you win. And hey, what if the planet also won? What if our communities also won? Like business is changing in that way too. We're seeing instead of ownership, right? You've probably heard this a million times that, the largest hotel company in the world doesn't own any hotel rooms, right? Or the largest car company in the world, car rental company, doesn't own cars. We're seeing more like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. And we're seeing these business models that are about sharing and about access rather than about ownership, rather than binding resources, we're unbinding resources. And I feel like that's part of this whole shift in consciousness that's also, we're seeing more of that feminine energetic rise to create that balance.
I think people are starting to realize that ownership of some resources increases risk.
Yeah.
And so in a certain way, that's part of that concentration where there's been too much maybe too much testosterone put into the whole cycle. And maybe we need to balance it out with something else because we're a little bit overboard. And there really is some benefit to the business in terms of reduction of risk and other things that comes to us this way. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And it's funny, like one of the ways that, and I hope this sounds right. And, I, at the risk of maybe offending someone, I hope I don't, because I come from love, I really want to share that. But like, I look at the world that maybe other people look at and get angry at, and there are things that are unjust and that feel wrong and people that get hurt. And I see all of that. And my life is a way of contributing to uplifting humanity. That's what I'm here for. And what I see too is that if the masculine had not built what it built, right? If it hadn't made airplanes, because really women by ourselves, we probably wouldn't have sat around and made airplanes and internets and things like that. Just that's, like I said, at the risk of offending people. But now I see this infrastructure that's been built, and I'm like, now the feminine intelligence can go get shot through that system, right? And thank you, right? That I can fly halfway across the world and give a speech and uplift, and I can, it's like if we come from that place of like everything is perfect, or as Jeff Nischwitz, our friend in common, says, everything is already okay, then why am I here now? Oh, I'm here to be part of that injection of consciousness and upliftment into this system, into this worldwide global net, right? Of like, we're all connected now. Like you can have a new idea, a new thought, something beautiful, and it can move all the way around the world in a matter of minutes, right? That wasn't possible 100 years ago, 200, 2,000 years ago.
Right. I can't really think of any reason that women wouldn't have invented airplanes or anything else.
I wouldn't have. Let's put it that way.
I listen. I think that if given the chance, and if they were, in a position of power 100 years ago, maybe they would have come up with these ideas, but they weren't, and so was men. And now they are. Now they are in a place where they can make big differences, and lots of inventions going forward are going to be, a result of men and women. All different people. That's I think what's interesting.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, I feel like the world it's changing, and there's, as with anything, there's pain, and there's the pain of expansion. There's the pain of stretching into new ideas and new ways of thinking and being. And there's so much opportunity too. And especially as a woman, I look at this and I think, oh my gosh, like, I'm so glad I'm alive today, right? I'm so glad to be part of this.
So what is when you think about feminine energy or masculine energy, what exactly does that mean? Like, is there a way we can think about that?
Yeah. And I personally, I really prefer the yin yang kind of way of talking about it, because it's not as charged with, politics and things like that. And so if you think about the yang, which we really know well in the business world, right? The yang energy, if we associate that with, and I'm going to go back to the masculine just after I said I wouldn't, but I love this analogy that my mentor, who I mentioned earlier, Nanilea, uses. It's like the energy of, if we look at pure biology, the sperm versus the egg. So she talks about, what is the energetic of sperm, right? It's fast moving. It's multitudinous, right? There's lots of them. It's competitive, right? It's focused in one direction. They are aiming for a goal, right? They're all competing with each other. And then the science shows that the competition among the sperm actually creates more forward momentum. That a group of sperm moving together moves a lot faster than one individual one. So they kind of like help each other get ahead through the competition, right? And so that's very masculine, right? Competition, focus, direction.
Listen, I haven't ever thought about that, but it absolutely is. I mean, that really kind of describes life. It's in that, and having the best little guy who wins makes the best baby. That
there's only one winner.
There's one winner.
One winner. Right. Everybody else is a loser. And you get to the goal and you penetrate it, right? You like get in there. It's mine. I win. Plant the flag. Boom.
And by the way, they don't get a ribbon for ninth place.
Oh, we're second, right? And so
there's no second place, no ninth place.
This is a reductive metaphor. I get that. And I'm having a little fun with it. And it's, it kind of gets the point across. The feminine energy, and I love it when she describes it. She's like, what does the egg do? The egg doesn't do much at all. The egg actually, and not that women don't do much, don't take me the wrong way. The egg does a lot, but it's not through the doing that the egg accomplishes the miracle, right? It's through the being. The egg emanates an energy. And actually the science is showing now that the egg emanates a signal to the sperm. It's like, come to me. This is where I am. You can find me if you follow my signal. And it's like, the egg takes her time coming down the fallopian tube, right? And it's one at a time, but they're not competing for who gets to go next, right? One just kind of pops out and goes down. And it's like this emanation, right? This come to me, this signal of and receptivity, right? And so if we just come from that place, that's the beginning. That's one way to look at.
That's a great. So being and doing, I get that. So being is the feminine, doing is the masculine. Mm-hmm. But do you find that are a lot of women that they want to switch into being doers instead of beers, or do they need to stay being on the being side? Or
I don't think you can win, or not win. That's a bad choice of words. I don't think you can achieve and be successful in this mostly patriarchal, masculine type of space, mostly without doing stuff. In this day and age, you got to do stuff. So I really come at this from what would happen if we looked at this from an integrated perspective, right? Because really the miracle of life does not happen with just the masculine or just the feminine. There is no way if each of us didn't, if there wasn't both. And by the way, what I'm saying is inside of me, I have both. And I had rejected a lot of the feminine qualities and just focused on developing my masculine qualities for most of my high school, college, MBA, early career, right? There wasn't any integration. There wasn't any balance. And the miracle of life happens when the two come together. So it's not okay, women go be this way and men go be this way. It's we're complicated. We're complex. We are highly evolved creatures. We are not one or the other. We are both. And what happens? The miracle happens when we can harness both energies. And the feminine in general, whether you're a man or a woman, has been the energetic that's generally been suppressed, right? And so in business, what I look at, when I talk about this from a business perspective, I talk a lot about branding, right? You can market and sell yourself from a very masculine place, men and women alike. You can go around chasing business, hunting business, cold calling for business, right? You can do all that and it works, right? It'll get you some results. And you could also build a really beautiful butterfly garden, right? Cultivate the flowers in your garden, water them, bring them soil, expose them to the sun, and attract butterflies. Come to me, right? That same energetic. You can put that energy towards nurturing a garden versus running around. And so that's kind of how I apply it to business, right? The feminine.
Tell me, because I'm a little thick on this here. So how does that really apply in a business environment? How do men and women get along better in a business environment, given what you've just described to us?
I think that if both men and women were developing more of that receptive energy, the deep listening, the compassion, the empathy, the nurturing energy. A lot of what we see, I'll give you an example what it isn't, right? Our world is built a lot around quarterly earnings, quarterly returns. What's the outcome this quarter? And what gets lost there is the long-term nurturing of the garden, right? So what happens if we take a longer range view? If we really consider what's the impact of this decision today on 10 generations down? But our business world doesn't really reward us for that right now, at least not in the short term.
Well, that's changing.
Changing, yeah.
I'll tell you why. It's changing because our competitors, China and some of these other large countries, take a different view than the quarter by quarter view that the United States of America has evolved into. And so we're talking about, let's say, the Chinese. I mean, I wrote my book on trends, and one of the big trends that we talk about, of course, is that we're competing with people who take a long view, 50, 100, even 200 years out.
Right.
That's that 10 generations that that's a hugely long time. And when, we can't think about quarter by quarter when our competitors are thinking about 100 years from now. I mean, we really have to think in a different way. And, we have to really come around to some new things. So maybe that means that we have to, adopt a new way of thinking, which is kind of what this whole discussion's about, is we need to learn to think a little differently.
And then part of it too, just like the energy of, instead of we need to, we have to, we must, right? It's also like we could, right? We get to choose. And that's part of that more open, just energetic, right? Coming from choice, coming from like, I invite you, remember, how I talk all the time. I invite people to consider things instead of telling them what they have to do, which is a more directive approach. And remember, you said earlier, and I didn't really answer your question, like, what is this masculine, feminine? I said yang, right? The yin is the energy, or let's start with the yang because it's the one we know. It's like focus, goals, outcomes, outcome focus, manipulating outcomes, getting results. If I do this, then I get that, right? Rationality, right? These are all the very yang, like speaking, expression, creation, building, construction. These are all very masculine kind of, or yang energy related things, doings. And then this yin side is like, the mystery, the unknown, the not knowing the answer, the flexibility, the surrender, the allowing, right? It's kind of the darker, it's more mysterious, it's more unknown. If you can describe the feminine, right? Like you're unique, because like the feminine part of it is that or the yin is that it's changing, that it adjusts, that it's ever changing, right? And so when we bring these two together, that's when it's like, that's where magic happens. That's where the miracle of life happens. And that's where I think the magic of our future is.
Well, what's clear and obvious is that we don't have to give up anything of ourselves, but we have to grow to allow others to contribute. It's clear and obvious to me, because listening to this, when I think about the Chinese thing, that they're thinking 200 years ahead, 100 or at least 50. I mean, the Japanese think that way. It's very different. Asian culture is very different than how we think.
Yeah.
And so we really need to bring new ideas to the table, because a lot of what we're doing, it's working okay. It's working pretty good, but we're not going to get to the next place thinking the way that we've always thought. And we do have access to a lot of really great people in our workforce. And it really is in everyone's interest to value them more and understand that, that we're different. Now, that being said, I hope that we can eliminate some of the anger, because there's lots of different little subgroups that have lots of anger, and that's not really helpful.
Can I share a perspective on that that's really helped me with that? Just going very, very surface on this, but there's a book that I've read a couple times that's, I think, very powerful. It's called The 12 Stages of Healing. And it's basically a book about this 12 kind of ways of being in the world, all the way from like suffering and depressed and just the lowest feeling that we feel and that we've all felt, all the way to the most like uplifted, elevated, like powerful, connected, divinely inspired way of being. Like there's, it's just a framework that somebody made up. And I find it really powerful, to think about things this way. It's like, okay. And to really know that as humans, we all have this range, right? Or we can have this range. We don't always allow ourselves to have that range. That's a whole nother conversation. But if we think about from the very lowest of the low, like suffering, and we move through the phases, at what point, oh, by the way, the book is by a guy named Donnie Epstein. It's kind of woo-woo, it's kind of out there. You don't necessarily have to read it, but this is where I got this concept from. You get to stage 4, right? From suffering all the way to like the most expansive version of you, right? At stage 4, there's a shift, right? From moving from suffering through polarity, through stuckness. I'm not going to get into each thing, but at stage 4, there's a shift. And that shift is what I call empowerment. And it's a shift of like, it's like this anger piece where finally like you're suffering, you're stuck and you've got just enough energy. Anger has more energy than suffering. Anger has more energy than stuck, right? Anger has energy and it helps us to move through something. Like if you've ever been in a place in your life where you're just like, you're being taken advantage of, or you feel like a victim, or somebody's hurting you, or, there's a moment where eventually you've got to get angry enough to get enough energy to like bust through it and say, enough of this, right? I'm not going to take this anymore. It's like being the kid on the playground that's getting bullied and then finally like standing up for yourself, right? And you can't get from suffering, at least in this framework, and I feel like this feels true to me, all the way to the highest of the high without moving through that phase of moving from victim to empowered. Like you've got to get through that. And and that anger energy, that sort of like, enough of this, I take my power back, is part of that. And so I feel like as a culture globally, there's been a suppression of women. Like you have to acknowledge that women's voices have not been heard. Women have been, quieted. We weren't able to own property. We couldn't sign a mortgage for ourselves 30 years ago was when that changed, right? Like there were a lot of things that we were not like able to do, except a few women that bust through, and they're notable in their exception, right? And so I think globally, or, at least culturally and socially in a lot of places, we've hit this point where women have said, enough of this. I take my power back. And there's anger in that. There has to be, to have enough energy to bust out.
But there's positive anger and there's negative anger. I mean, it's, listening, I get that, listen, when you have pain causes you to go to the doctor and get the problem solved. I agree that pain is a good thing, that your body designs it to help you to get better. Anger is probably the same thing, that it happens so that we get better. But it's not good to stay in that state. No. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are in that place for a long time.
Well, and think about it, though, that if we think about it from a macro perspective, right? A lot of people have to move through that phase, and people are at different phases of that. It might take somebody a whole lifetime to move through anger.
Yeah.
But as a culture, as a global community, we're moving through it. And there are people that are on the other side of it. There are people like that are, all right, I got it out of my system. I did it, right? And then there are people that haven't even gotten there yet, that are still in the suffering, that are still in the suppression, right? And it's like, if you think of it like a whole, we're pulling people forward. The people who are already through it are pulling the rest through and like pulling up the culture in a way.
Yeah.
And I just feel like we got to move through that.
Yeah.
And acknowledge it and have compassion for it too.
Well, listen, the thing I think about is that, and I don't know what it's like being being a woman or being somebody else, but we're making progress. I certainly recognize we're not progressing enough. It's not happening fast enough. It's not happening well enough, but we're certainly making progress. I don't think we're stagnating. I don't think we're going backwards. I think that we're making progress, and we just have to all work together to make more progress. Yeah. And that's it.
And listen to each other and love each other. And that's like what I feel like you and I do, which is so fun, is like we really appreciate each other. And that's really where it starts, is like respect.
Well, listen, you do a good job of making it easy. So thank you very much for doing that. And listen, thanks for sharing your ideas. I mean, this has been a really cool, it's a little different than a lot of other stuff.
Different. Yeah. I don't usually talk about this stuff.
Listen, a lot of the people I work with are male. I think that they need to hear a nice perspective once in a while. And I've learned a lot from being around you and your perspective, because even though we both get to the same place, we do it in a different way. And it's like, I look at it and I think, you know what, sometimes your way is better than my way. And sometimes my way is better, but and that's how everything in life is it's not always better my way. Sometimes it's better another person's way. We need to be more open about that. So thanks, Michelle. Really appreciate you sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening and for inviting me here and opening this conversation up.
Great. Well, listen, we will we'll continue the dialogue, and I appreciate your friendship.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Profit from the Inside with Joel Block. For more insights and to learn more, visit joelblock.com.
How about a shout out and a giant thanks to my podcast producer, David Wolf, and his team at Podcast and Radio Networks. Profit from the Inside simply wouldn't be what it is without David and his team. For more information or to learn how you can launch and produce your own podcast, reach out to podcastandradio.com.
Get the inside track on 20 top business trends for 2020 from Joel Block. Joel's insights bring Wall Street to your street so you can profit from the inside in 2020. Just text the word TREND to 72000. That's 72000 and download your free copy today. Grab your phone and get the inside track on business trends that affect you and your business. Just text the word TREND to 72000 for your copy now.